of the young people that are participating in them. So thanks very much.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, great. Just, I suppose, Senator Riley's point in relation to the Public Employment Service is a fit for purpose. We did a survey of young job seekers 2 or 3 years ago, and overall, we asked them about their experience of engaging with FOSS and, as it was then, Department of Social Protection, and generally it was quite. I think they did understand that the system was under a lot of pressure, and the numbers in the last number of years have increased a lot. But generally, apart from 1 or 2 good examples, I think the sense was that no, it wasn't. They didn't get the sort of engagement that they would have really needed. It was kind of like things have gone to a hatch, given information 5 or 6 times, not getting the level, I suppose, of support that they kind of expected. And I know the new intro model is trying to now, as Dermot said, we're trying to go to a greater engagement, but that actually does require a lot more people at the front line engaging with job seekers, and particularly young job seekers, because a lot of them don't have work experience. They're in a different scenario, and it is, I think, really important. A lot of young job seekers take it very seriously because they kind of feel if I make the wrong choice in relation to a training course or work experience, this could be very detrimental to my career. So they take it like a job interview, and when you go then and you just get 5 minutes, and I have heard some really dispiriting examples. Just last week we had consultation with youth workers who are working with this category of young people, and just kind of the attitude as well. And I'm not saying that a lot of really people in the public promises are working under huge pressure, huge workloads. A lot of them are doing great work, but in some cases young people get a very negative reaction when they go in, and I kind of feel demeaned, and it doesn't really help to encourage them to engage. In relation to the most disadvantaged, just to say on that, I do think and I know it's something the European Youth Forum have also pushed, we do need independent monitoring of the youth guarantee if it happens in Ireland. We do need to know, is it working? We need to have involvement of young people in that, the people who are actually using the system. I do think that's vital. I don't think there's enough of external evaluation of public employment services as there should be. On the disadvantaged young people, again, I think you've got to put yourself in their shoes. A lot of young people who maybe had a very bad experience of the education system, and I think the Eurofound study on the young people, I think Deputy Durkin talked about their levels of trust in the system is actually quite low. So they get the letter in the post from the FOSS office, even automatically they kind of assume this is bad news. I'm not. So I think the youth sector, a lot of our member organisations, the youth workers are on the ground. They do actually have a credibility. They do have a track record. We're not saying that they're the total solution, but we think there's a role to be played for people who have, working with this group of young people. And I think a lot of what we're saying is we're not training providers, we're not employment services, but a lot of our member organisations could be that bridge between the young people who won't go to a training centre. And a lot of the young people who are in this category, they actually have been thrown off training courses because they're not prepared. They actually, they've had difficulties. They might have started and they had an addiction problem, as Deputy Durkin talked about, but then they don't have the other supports to kind of help them. So it is kind of acting as that support to keep them on the track. In relation to Deputy O'Reilly's point about why are the numbers coming down, I think it's true, as he said. I think obviously immigration is a factor, the number staying in education and training is a factor, but also there's a growing category of young people who don't actually qualify for social welfare benefits. They're living at home with their parents, they might be just over the threshold, so they don't see the point of going to sign on for no benefits. So we're getting, and I think Dermot talked about, if the library is going to become a gateway for the youth guarantee, we have a problem then, because then we have a category of young people who actually aren't signing on, who actually won't be under the current model, won't come under the guarantee. On the apprenticeships, I agree. We went from 8,000 apprenticeships a year to 1,000 because of the crash in the construction sector. That's because I think that's a real alternative route for many young people. They don't want to be web designers, or they actually want to do a trade, a skill, and I think that's something we probably need to do more of. I did come across a scheme recently in Drogheda where they actually have funding, I think again, where they actually do up houses which have been neglected, local authority houses, and they bring in a group of young people who are unemployed, and the scheme is essentially they renovate the house, and over an 8 or 9 month period. I think we need to see more of that sort of stuff being done.
Number of estates available.
Yeah. The payment by results model is essentially, in the UK, as I understand it, essentially what happened was the government brought in the private sector to say, well, here's 10,000 people who are unemployed. You will get paid X amount if you move on 70% of those within a certain period, 80%, whatever. I suppose our only concern about that is, as I said, it's for some of the young people here, it might be very ambitious to say they're going to be in a job in 6 months or 12 months. They might need a lot more support. And if it's totally focused on getting a young person into a job within 6 months or 12 months, well, then they're going to pick the young people that are actually closer to the labour market, and they're going to forget about it. And I think it does, I think it did, as I understand it, it did create some absurd situations where people were just being churning. It's basically people were just being moved into jobs that they kind of ended up back on the dole again, even though the private provider got funded, got paid for actually moving them on for that job. And so I think there were a lot of issues there. I think Deputy Durkin is also right when he says, you know, we've been here before. We did actually, and I suppose unfortunately, the youth guarantee actually, I think all the analysis would show that this is the sort of thing you would do in the good times, because it would catch the people before they fall into long-term unemployment, and not doing it in the middle of a crisis. I think, as has been said, to doing it when we have such huge institutional reform in the public employment services and education, further education training, it's a big task. I think though employers, and what we're saying about, particularly about the most disadvantaged young people, it's about giving them maybe a bit of confidence, a bit of hope. Because some young people are saying, well, there's no point going on a training course, no point kind of staying to do my leaving cert, because there's no jobs. But we're trying to get forward the argument that yes, there is, it is tough, but that actually giving them that sense of hope, and also maybe giving them a bit of resilience and the soft skills that a lot of employers are also looking for, that people are able to, they may not have hard skills, but they certainly need the soft skills, which is kind of, consistency and working in a team and making decisions and showing innovation and things like that. They're really important in the current labour market. I think Deputy Byrne's points, I do think we need to ensure that the money is targeted. Now, how that's done, I think obviously it's a matter for government, but I think we did, in the 90s, there were particular schemes that actually made sure, you talked about the urban scheme, the urban programme, that the money didn't kind of get lost between, Europe and government departments and different agencies. It did actually kind of go almost straight into the communities, and I think that's what we definitely need to ensure. And I think you made a very valid point, which I certainly would agree with, around the coherence. There are such a lot, and I've been trying to do an analysis of the different schemes and programmes, and there's a lack of coherence because a lot of schemes have different conditions to get on them, different age groups. Now, there are certain reasons why that is, but there is also a lack of coherence. And talking about the staff even dealing with job seekers, they find it very difficult to understand, well, what is, I come in and I'm unemployed for 9 months. What do I actually qualify for? And it's a bit of a, it's a difficult job. So I think we could try and maybe make the further education and training and employment support system a little bit more coherent and not less complex, and I think, as Dermot talked about, more joined up so that it's not a lottery depending on, because people get very upset when they think they're eligible for a course and then they find out, well, no, actually you have to wait another 6 months, because and that's encouraging this activity. So in relation to Deputy Hannigan's point about the timescale, I think it would be an issue in relation to, I assume the European funding is an integral part for the government, but I think that may not come on track until 2015. But I think the Irish government can do a lot immediately, and there is a pilot scheme that the government have applied for in Ballymun, as far as I'm aware, which we are involved in. So, sorry, yeah.
Thank you very much, James. Now, a vote has been called in the Dáil. We've got a few minutes before we need to go. Can I suggest that we continue on? We listen to Dermot's answers, and if anybody needs to feels that they need to leave, then they can always consult the full in the online debate. Is that okay? And we'll also suspend without going into private session. There's nothing on the private session.
And if we get the opportunity of having a further extension of this meeting, I would very much appreciate it.
But I'll stay and conclude the meeting if you want to leave.
Thanks.
Contribution. Thank you, Dermot.
Okay. In relation to the timescale, you could do it very quickly if it's a matter of simply getting it on the table. I think we need to take a long-term view of all of these measures, but you can start and understand that you're not going to finish it very quickly. I think I was handed the brief for Youth Reach in 1988, and in my view, it took the guts of 2 decades to actually go from where there was nothing to something which was able to stand alongside other things. I mean, so you do need to take a long-term view, even though you have to act very fast, and one can do both. In relation to the local structures, well, of course, one of the things that's afoot under the proposals in relation to education and training boards and so on is to try and establish local structures that will be responsive. There is, I think, a risk that this could be quite instrumental and would lose the developmental functions, for example, that VECs have traditionally fulfilled. But if you take the education and training boards as are coming into play, the local development companies, the partnerships, and the new structures under the local authority reforms and the realignment, it may not be a matter of establishing new entities at local level, but I do think, and James said this as well, that the local action is extremely important, because there are variations right across the board, and whatever national framework or national policy is introduced needs to be interpretable at the local level in flexible ways that actually are tailored to working rather than to, if you like, to being. As regards to the payments and results issue, the critical point there, I think, is to do with cherry picking, and with if you have several hundred young people looking for a place, and you have 20 places available, and if it is a condition of you getting all of your funding that you place them all in employment, inevitably you will select the people who are most employable. You will cherry pick. And that was a major problem with some of the FOSS programs in the late 80s, early 90s, the Youth Skills program. And it rather, when you come to then monitoring the effectiveness, you wind up actually monitoring the in-person factors rather than in-training factors, if you understand what I'm saying. So as you're not, what looks very effective when you look at the results may actually not be to do with the effectiveness of the training or the action. It may actually be to do with the people that you've selected to participate. And it is, I think, a significant issue. In relation to apprenticeships, there's 2 things that I think that I'd like to say about that. I mean, the first is that with regard to those areas where numbers declined in, for example, traditional apprenticeship areas, and we have a very narrow apprenticeship system in Ireland, but with regard to those, there are mechanisms which we have had in the past. For example, the Community Youth Training Programme, which FOSS used to run, which you still see signs around the country that houses or buildings or old heritage sites were renovated. And in many instances, they were temporary employment mechanisms which allowed people who are on apprenticeships to continue the path of apprenticeship during a period of low employment or a period when there was employers were not able to take them on board. That, and there was the FOSS had a linked work experience, which is another very useful mechanism. The models exist to maintain the apprenticeship line, if you like. But it's also the case that there's an increasing interest internationally, and I think you can see it here in things like Job Bridge, in what might be described as apprenticeship style measures, which focus on using the workplace and actually linking the training in the workplace and putting the individual in a work situation. And there are many benefits, but that's perhaps at a higher level. A professional apprenticeship model is maybe a way of describing it. And that would also get over a comment which is frequently made by many employers. I mean, and again, I've heard from small employers, very youth-friendly employers, as well as people who didn't have any particular bias one way or the other, that many young people are ill-prepared for work when they are employed. It's a consistent comment from small and medium and large employers. And some of this is to do with expectations, perhaps a hangover from the Celtic Tiger period, where people expected to walk straight into a job which paid well. It may be to do with, there are many possible explanations, but there's a remarkable consistency in what employers say. They say, for example, a person comes in with having done a degree, they've had 30 days to do a project in the workplace. They're expected to do that within a day. And the employers, again, in my experience, and I've met with groups of employers in Dublin, South East, as part of this study I was working on, and the employers consistently said it takes 6 months for a young person to get up to speed where they're actually making a contribution to the enterprise. Apprenticeship approaches, whether it's internships like Job Bridge and so on, are a way of actually breaking over that. And it's also a way, however, of connecting the world of employment, the world of work, with the world of education and training. And in Ireland, we have, over the years, we have allowed that, because there was very high demand in the labour market. I mean, nobody needed to do work very hard at that bridge. That bridge simply existed by virtue of the very high demand in the labour market. So I think apprenticeship is as a model, not only using mechanisms to actually continue existing apprenticeship in times of low demand, but as a model to connect the worlds of education and training and the worlds of work, I think is extremely significant, extremely important. And I anticipate that we will be paying much more attention to that in the future. In relation to the question on IT skills that was asked, the FIT programme and FIT mechanism is a very effective way of working with, particularly in relatively disadvantaged areas, and actually connecting them up with work in the IT area. And there's very good data supporting the approach, and a very strong evaluative culture within that particular action. In relation to the disadvantage, I mean, I think that it is absolutely the case that those who find it most difficult to engage with the labour market and those who find it most difficult to engage with services are, simply by virtue of the way things work, are liable to wind up at the back of the queue. I think that's something which has to be addressed. James has mentioned that. But it's also the case that that's a conversation that needs, I mean, you were asking about the public employment services and fit for purpose. There is a conversation that needs to be happening both at national level, I think it's happening at national level, but particularly at the operational level, between the employment services and education and training providers and community and voluntary services, including the local development companies. Because a fear was expressed to me by people in on the social protection side, who would be, if you like, the public employment service now, that their focus would be on the disadvantaged and those furthest from the labour market in particular. But their worry is that because education and training providers will be judged on the basis of placement and results, that the focus there will be on the easy to place and not on the most disadvantaged. So whether that's correct or not, it does indicate a very strong need that they're talking and that they are all of one mind when it comes to actually focusing on particular target groups at local level. So in other words, that the action is consistent and coherent and collaborative between the different arms of the service. Because that comes back to the point about the youth guarantee and whether the live register is the gateway and whether the public employment service is the gateway to the youth guarantee. Because if that's the case, that would suggest that the public employment service is, if you like, in the driving seat, and that then sets up another kind of relationship with employers, with the education and training providers who become clients of the public employment service. As you know, I mean, historically there's always been an uneasiness on the public employment services side in relation to their relationship with education and training providers. Would they, but equally, education and training providers are extremely uneasy at seeing themselves as being service providers to the public employment service and so on. So there's a very serious conversation needs to happen there, especially at local level, at operational level. The issue that was raised, and again it comes up, and it's particularly pertinent in relation to the more disadvantaged clients in relation to the public employment service, that question of guidance I think is very, very important. And it goes back to, well, how are people being trained? What you have at the moment is very substantial numbers of people being drawn together from 3 very different services into into intro and into the one organisation. And people who have been doing very different things. Somebody who's been a community welfare officer has a set of skills which do not readily translate into case management of a person who is unemployed. Yet that's where we're going with the way the service is going to operate. And so there's a good deal of kind of inter-service knowledge exchange and knowledge, which is going to be very, very important. And of course, creating the time for that. If you've got a caseload, intro staff will have to meet people 3 times as often as they had to meet them under the National Employment Action Plan process. So suddenly people have got a very significant increase in workload. Meanwhile, at the same time, we're asking them to engage in quite close quarter engagement at local level with employers, and employers consistently say that they are not talked to at local level in relation to service provision in the employment services or in education and training. Nobody listened to them. We had a meeting and the employers grouped them. Some very significant employers who've been doing very important developments in the southeast. First time anyone ever asked us to a meeting of this nature. So the employment service got to meet that set of demands, as have the local education providers, while they also increase very much their level of activity. So it's quite a challenge.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all 3 of our guests today, and on behalf of the committee, can I thank you for your input. As Senator Riley mentioned, she is preparing a report on behalf of the committee in relation to the Youth Guarantee, and I have no doubt that the contributions of our 3 guests today will form a valuable input into that report. So thank you again for your time today. And the meeting is now adjourned.